week's edition of Old Romans Unscripted. And joining me, as is becoming usual now, once again, thank goodness, we have Father Tom, Thomas Gerke in Chicago. Hello, Father Tom, how are you?
Hello, Your Grace, doing well. And yourself?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. A bit hectic. Music directing the pantomime now. First night is tonight. We've had 2 dress rehearsals and tech and everything else in the past week, and that on top of getting ready for going to the Philippines next month, which requires basically a month's worth of paperwork and website work and all the rest of it before I go. So that's on top. The usual daily grind. So
no, I'm right there with you. You know, I remember back when I was in the UP growing up, I was much involved in the theater up there, so I know exactly what you're going through, because during this time frame we would have our winter musical, typically for the community theater program, and most of the time I was involved in that for the years up there. So this time of rehearsals and getting everything together, getting ready for production, I know exactly what you're going through, empathize completely, and yeah, hopefully we'll know more next week ahead for next month. But yeah.
Super. Well, greetings to all our viewers. Lovely to see you as always. Now, I am going to make a confession. This is pre-recorded because of the pantomime. I can't host a live show tomorrow, so that's why we're doing a pre-record today. So today is actually Friday rather than Saturday. And if anything has happened in the next 24 hours, we're not going to mention it in this program because, believe it or not, we're not prophets. So,
right now,
or at least neither of us seems to have been given the gift of prophecy of any great stature. So, of course, there's plenty to talk about since the last show. And which was, of course, New Year's Eve, just after the passing of Pope Benedict XVI, memory eternal. And since then, of course, we've had his funeral, and now slated for tomorrow is the funeral of Cardinal George Pell, who died on Monday, just a few days after Benedict's funeral. And of course, both considered controversial, both considered orthodox, defenders of the faith and of the church's tradition. Pell, of course, was initially, it seemed, a collaborator with Francis, being numbered amongst the select 9, the sort of cardinal cabinet that Francis instituted at the beginning of his pontificate. 9 cardinals, specific responsibilities to advise him on the day-to-day operations of the Curia and of the Church. But as I'm sure you all know, George Pell was later falsely accused of paedophilia. He was initially jailed for almost 2 years before finally receiving vindication in the High Court of Australia. But interestingly, of course, he had just before the accusation came, he had exposed problems with the Vatican finances. And some people think it's also rather strange that he should have died so quickly and suddenly from an otherwise, whilst it being described as otherwise, a routine hip operation. Well, we could go spin into the world of speculation there, but
I don't think I need to speculate terribly much. What I do want to point out is that I believe he was in his 70s.
81.
81. Okay. So, I mean, and typically in modern times, still, not as old as, being 81 would be 100 years ago. So, even with all the modern medication and modern medicine that we have today, that type of surgery does actually have some serious complications that can arise from it. Mainly the biggest one being blood clots. So, because you're dealing with the femoral bones, and not to get too medical, but you're dealing with the hip, you're dealing with joints, you're dealing with the largest bones in the body, the femurs. And there can be unforeseen complications, mainly being a blood clot can form. And if that blood clot does form, then depending on the size or how many there are, if they move throughout the body, eventually if they get to the heart or lungs or brain, then they'll cause sudden death. I know I've experienced those type of calls in my medical career. They're not fun because you don't know what's going on till a post-op. You don't know till an autopsy. So but at the time, there's nothing you can do further. But you don't know that, so you still try your best. So for once, I'm actually not going to go down rabbit holes and get my tinfoil hat on and speculate. I know, shocker to the viewers. 2023, I'm trying to be a little bit more practical. So, but I do think that even when all said and done with Cardinal Pell, as many people that are going to speculate and already have started speculating, I know there's been a few Catholic commentators out there already kind of getting things riled up a little bit. I do think that this, maybe by the grace of God, just one of those unforeseen complications due to a major surgery. I mean, a hip replacement, hip surgery, any type of surgery where you're going under anesthesia does have those risks. That's why you sign the waivers. That's why you have the consent. That's why that's why we're given, I know traditionally it wasn't necessarily done, but today, if you're going to be put under anesthesia, you should receive extreme unction. You should receive Holy Viaticum. As close to the possibility for you to go under. It's like, if you have a surgery scheduled for next week, you don't call the priest up, a week before and say, hey, Father, you do it like the day before. Like typically, if you're going to be put under anesthesia, you have to fast 24 hours in advance. So to receive Holy Viaticum, you have to do that before 24 hours. And that's fine. I mean, that covers you. You get anointed, you receive Holy Viaticum. If anything should happen to you, and even if something does happen right before the surgery, you can always have a priest hear your confession, right? So before you go under, you can always get one final confession, and if need be, if something, God forbid, crazy happens. But that's the purpose for the sacrament, because we don't know what could happen. And as good as medicine has come in the past 100 years or so, there's still the act of God that so many people forget about. And I think maybe we need to be a little bit more mindful of. God has a say when life begins and when life ends.
And of course, what's given grease to the speculation is because of an article that Cardinal Pell wrote that was published, or due to be published, just before or around his passing, published in the UK's The Spectator magazine, where he refers to the toxicity of the Vatican. Particularly, he was writing particularly about the synod on synodality, was the main thrust of his article. But together with it was that description of the nature of things in the Curia. And of course, subsequent to Pope Emeritus's funeral, other information has come to light about the way things were done or not done in the Vatican leading up to the funeral. As everyone knows, there was some controversy about heads of state and diplomats and who was invited or not invited, or who was expressly asked not to attend. But there were other, perhaps more concerning tidbits of information about what was going on internally in the Curia or in the Vatican leading up to the funeral, where various things that would otherwise normally have been observed in mourning for a late pontiff were ignored or expressly forbidden, to the point that most, I think, disconcertingly and contrastingly, was the attitude of the disparity in the attitude of the Italian government and the Vatican Secretariat of State, that the Italian government declared a national day of mourning on the day of the funeral for Pope Benedict, whereas there was no official period of mourning at all in the Vatican.
They probably had a day of celebration and partying, so that way they can finally put the rigidness of that papacy behind them and carry on with their new agenda.
Well, you wouldn't have got that impression from Francis's face during the funeral.
Has he ever had a good face? I've never seen
him look so. Now, I mean, it was a very cold morning. I mean, it was winter and foggy, so it would have been as damp as anything. And I can imagine if you suffer from any kind of rheumatism or arthritis or anything like that, and if you're old and frail, etc., and we know that he has problems with his hip and his legs, and he was in fact brought out in a wheelchair. So it might have been that the general ambience was not conducive, and he was feeling quite miserable. But it's also, been suggested that actually what the picture that sort of took the media by storm the next day of him kissing kissing Benedict's coffin, and as it was being carried out of St. Peter's Square. Apparently that scenario almost didn't happen. Apparently Francis had made it quite clear to those close to him that he wanted to be back. He wanted to be out as soon as the funeral was finished. He wanted to be back into the war, I suppose. And I think it's literally only because as he was walking out, the coffin was coming round, and somebody said, it even looks as though the MC sort of stops him and whispers in his ear and says, like, the coffin's right behind you. But then they turned round,
right,
and then he stepped forward. Now, I mean, again, there's been lots of speculation about all of that. And I don't think it's necessary really to speculate upon it. But I think but what is interesting is the way that there was consternation in the Vatican leading up to the funeral, and apparently there have been murmurings afterwards by various cardinals who were not pleased. I think there's a general feeling of displeasure at the way things were done.
Well, I mean, can you blame them? It's one of those things where it's, first and foremost, Benedict XVI, Pope Emeritus, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, however you want to use a title, at least use his name. He was a bishop. First and foremost, he was a priest, but then he was consecrated a bishop and then elevated to a cardinal. There's a fraternity there. There's a brotherhood that I don't think many people seem to realize or acknowledge, or they forget it. That amongst brother priests, right? As a Franciscan, I have my Franciscan brothers and sisters in the order, and there's that fraternity, there's that camaraderie there. With brother priests, you see a priest, no matter where you're from, there's that sense of brotherhood. There's a sense of connection. And same thing with bishops and cardinals. And, the number gets less as you go up the ranks, right? There's a lot of priests, there's, many cardinals, or many bishops, and then few cardinals, right? So as you move up the ranks, there's less of you. And so that bond, that fraternity becomes stronger in a sense. And to see a brother cardinal, a brother bishop, kind of have a lack of reverence or a lack of pomp to the duty of his office for his funeral, that is kind of alarming, because maybe the brother cardinals are thinking, well, what am I going to get? What happens for my eternal repose? What type of send-off if I'm going to have? And I think we're going to see this with Cardinal Pell, depending on how they decide to do his, I want to say requiem, but I know it's funeral nowadays. Massive Christian funeral burial, as they call it. But how they do his funeral mass, right? I think that's going to be a sign to the other cardinals. This is kind of the direction the church is going. And to go back to that point of what Cardinal Pell wrote in that letter of toxicity, well, I'm sorry, but, newsflash, the Vatican has always had a sense of toxicity to it. You can go back to the Middle Ages, you can go back earlier, you can go back to the first millennia. There's always been that hindrance of toxicity there. Politics have always been involved in the church from even the 12 apostles.
Yeah,
so
hold on, but I thought about that, but Pell's comments are related to the faith, and this is what is new. This is what is different about. So there's always been Vatican intrigue. There's always been internal politics, etc. But this situation is that, and the fact that that it's the faith and it's the theology. In previous
and not to digress that point.
Politics didn't affect doctrine. That's not to say that there weren't doctrinal politics going on. Sometimes there were, but this, I think, really what Pell has highlighted with his reference to the toxicity is that he's actually referring to many things contextually. Mm-hmm. So there's the crisis of the faith, there's the crisis in the church, clerical abuse, lack of discipline, heresies and apostasies, cardinals spouting heresies and bishops promoting apostasy, and all of that. Then there's the crisis of the faith. Then actually there is this situation apparently within the Vatican, and this is not new. So this has been referred to before, about the tyrannical way in which Francis conducts business within the Vatican. And like I was saying before, Pell was one of his initial collaborators, but he soon sort of lost grace. And in fact, of those 9 cardinals that were selected by Francis at the beginning of his pontificate, none of them are left as close advisors.
Right. And that just shows there is a tyrant mentality there. And you've seen it so many times with what Pope Francis has said or written or whatever. Jesus, when I believe he said our Lord and Savior was a socialist communist. He made that. I don't know if that was an interview or whatever, but he's constantly alluded time and time again to socialism, to communism, to this global agenda, to this, we need to be, focused on the world, not focused on heaven, time and time again. Right. For those who, and obviously, it's just vindication for tradition is what it is. And, the toxicity that Cardinal Pell alluded and wrote about, I wasn't trying to make light of that. And I understand the crisis in the faith. Yes, this is new. We don't have anything precedent to go off of for the type of situation we're facing right now in the church. The only thing we have to go off of is our Blessed Mother. When her private revelation, private, and not to get too much down that, but there is some truth. Well, there should be. She's our Blessed Mother. There is truth to what she has prophesied and to what some mystics surrounding those apparitions have prophesied. Bishop against bishop, priest against priest. There will be an eclipse of the church. There will be, an ape of the faith. So if this is a time frame that it's happening, if this is, that time, okay, guess what? We strap on the armor, the breastplate of Christ. We get our sword ready, the rosary, and we remain steadfast and faithful to the truth. We fight the good fight. But I do think that my concern, my biggest worry with all this, especially with Catholic commentators, is the fear factor aspect of things. I worry that too many souls are going to get caught up in the fear factor, the scapegoating, the gaslighting, and I think it can cause more harm to one's faith than actually help, and that's my only concern.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of gaslighting in the last couple of weeks, and peculiarly from some commentators who otherwise, wanted to align or be seen to align themselves with tradition, but who have since turned round and started calling other traditionalists schismatics. I'm thinking particularly of Matt Fradd, with his salacious interview with John Salazar, and Michael Lofton, who seems very quick, Michael Lofton of Reason and Theology, who seems very quick to call anybody a schismatic who slightly disagrees with his own opinion or perspective. And the trouble is, this is particularly worrying because actually, up until a couple of weeks ago, everybody was, it seemed to me, just about every commentator was being clear about the actual definition of schism, which is, of course, refusal of communion with the Holy Father and with those who are in communion with him. If you break that, you're schismatic. And the point being made, of course, was that no traditionalist Catholic is of that opinion other than the Sedevacantists, but everybody else basically, regards themselves as being dutifully and primarily in communion with the successor of Peter, and in communion with those who are in communion with him. So all of a sudden, for people who should know better, like Fradd and Michael Lofton, to start calling people schismatics just simply because they have a different take on the crisis in the church at the present time.
Well, it's all about feelings, and even in the trad circles, they're not immune to this. People don't use, now ironically for Lofton, they don't use reason and intellect. They don't understand and able to regurgitate what reason, intellect, philosophy, theology actually is, and the proper usage of that. They don't get it, because if they did, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. And that's,
I think that's part of it, but as well, I think Robert Kennedy yesterday had quite a good video called Catholic Inc. And he was making the point there that there are those of late who have recently sort of, touted themselves as traditionalists and said sympathetic things about tradition, etc. But who, at the end of the day, rely on or would like to rely upon the approbation of the hierarchy, and like to be seen to be in favor.
Well, yeah, if you're in good standing with the modernist Rome agenda, then you can sell books, you can do talks, you can the Catholic Inc. Incorporated. Incorporation means money. I mean, well, it doesn't mean money, but I mean, for the sake of this definition, if we're talking about money, if you have the support of the hierarchy who are modernist Rome, you have a better chance of making money. And if this is what you're doing for your career, this is what you're doing for your livelihood,
this is how you
need it.
You get invited by Cardinals Blaise Supish to give a talk in Chicago, all expenses paid.
We're not going to bring him up.
But, I mean, that's exactly what Robert Kennedy was saying. And we can all see it.
What's more important to these Catholic commentators, salvation of souls or making a buck? And we see, it's going back right to our Lord, right? What does he say? You can't have two masters. You either serve the Lord, your God, or you serve mammon. You can't serve both. And you're either going to be traditional, you're going to serve God, or you're going to be pleasing to him with the traditional customs of the church, or you're going to serve mammon. You're going to give compromise. You're going to make these changes to serve mammon, which is modernist Rome, which is modernism, which is a heresy. Yeah. I mean, that's as black as, I know it's coming from a gray Franciscan, but that's black and white as you can get.
Well, that's the nub of it is, as you say, modernism, emotionalism. I mean, there's great confusion by some commentators in their understanding of infallibility and the papal infallibility and ordinary magisterial infallibility, etc. They get very confused about that. Even to the point that they actually, even if they don't say it, they actually do think that unless you agree 100% with everything the reigning pontiff says, they will call you schismatic.
Their actions speak louder than their words.
Yeah. And again, there's an article, Marco Torsati of Stilium Curiae, who is a Vatican blogger. He's released a post today discussing this dilemma in contemporary moral theology, and the way that it's taught and the way that it's practiced, and the way that it's conceived in places like the Curia and the seminaries of Rome and the pontifical universities, where questions have become whether theology has become situational rather than black and white. And this is a progression that we've seen in social mores generally. I know some of you know that one of my favorite TV programs is Call the Midwife, which you can see on Netflix if you're not in the UK. And Call the Midwife is set originally in the 1950s, goes into the 1960s, about nuns running a district nursing and midwifery service in the East End of London. And it's a great commentary to some extent on social change. We can, we sort of see how at the beginning of the program, the concept of contraception or abortion or anything else completely frowned upon, and then by the mid 60s, it's beginning. Oh well, it's dreadful to see these people, these women suffer in this way, and this alleviates that, and so on and so forth. And you see this situational ethics begin to take shape, which as we we now know has so infused itself in the contemporary zeitgeist that it's caused this confusion in the church, to the extent that you have leading prelates of various denominations. I mean, not just the Catholic ones supposedly of Germany and Belgium, but also of prelates of the Church of England here. Just, the Bishop of Worcester yesterday wrote an article about the blessing of same-sex unions, saying that, in my experience of the same-sex couples that I know, they don't hurt anyone, they get on very well, and why shouldn't they why shouldn't they sort of continue as they are, and why shouldn't we bless that? And
well, look at the bishops in America, the same commentary.
Yeah, similar commentary. Yeah. And it's this kind of situational ethic, or situational ethics that has crept in to moral theology.
And it's not, carry on, your grace.
No, that's right.
So, it's not to say that moral theology is objective. You learn that when we're in seminary. You study St. Alphonsus de Liguori, moral theology. You study St. Thomas Aquinas, his writings on theology and moral theology. You study the doctors. There is objectiveness to theology, to the moral application of theology. But there also is that pastoral approach to theology, and that becomes subjective. That's not to say that theology is subjective, but rather the application to the individual that is being pastored, that becomes subjective. That's that personal relationship with Christ. Now, the exception to the rule does not become the rule, and where somebody's getting advice and being helped along with certain whatever it may be, that doesn't say that that's the universal rule for everybody. That's just how that one soul is being helped along to be saved. And everybody has a different path. Everybody has different crosses. So the objective moral rule as a priest that we take upon ourselves to then focus, analyze, and apply to that soul to help that soul, that is now being taken in how can I say without being abused? There we go. It's being abused. Exaggerated. And so it's almost being inverted, really. And well, I mean, who's the master of inversion, right? The master of confusion, right? I mean, I hate to go down that rabbit hole, but it is that inversion of the moral theology approach is what we're seeing, and we're seeing this. This is not just Vatican II. This is not just 1950s, 60s, the revolution. This actually began 100 or 200 years prior to, and one could almost say even 500 years prior to, with a certain German monk and a certain 99 Thesis. But you see that this is not something that just happened overnight. This was slowly integrated, and we're just now seeing the unfortunate completion of it, if you will.
I think it goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, to be frank.
Well, yeah. I mean, I wasn't trying to do the whole Genesis thing.
but when you think, it's human nature to try and mollify and get away with something, even when Adam and Eve were tempted, what did the devil apply? What was his technique? It was to make the whole situation completely subjective. Subjective. The devil's favorite vice is pride, and by pride can mean simply the ego. It's the self-reference, And so we see that with Adam and Eve, and we see it with the generations since. It is atypical of the human condition. But the problem now is, particularly that this kind of situational ethics. I mean, that's actually, that's an academic term. Situational ethics has been for the last 40 or 50 years. There's this suggestion there is no right or wrong. The
my truth.
Yeah, my truth, that everything is relative. That rules have to be applied subjectively or understood subjectively, etc. Now, there is one concession to the church's discipline, and that, of course, is the salvation of souls is the highest law. But that is never meant, so in the realms of, for example, canon law or ecclesiastical discipline, that has never meant the total putting aside of rules or regulations, but it simply meant, as you said at the beginning, to find the way that would most help a soul to realize their salvation. Now, sometimes that does mean incurring even an excommunication, because sometimes, as Proverbs tells us, you spare the rod and spoil the child. Sometimes you need to be tough in order to demonstrate true love. And as any parent knows, it can break some parents' hearts sometimes to discipline their children, but they know that they have to do it, because if they don't, then that child is going to become spoiled.
There was a saying, I came across not too long ago. If you raise your kids, you can spoil your grandkids. If you spoil your kids, you will end up having to raise your grandkids. Obviously that for you and I, that's a mute subject, but for parents, it's that call to, you have to raise your kids. You have to discipline. You have to be loving, caring, but also, justice. You have to be just. And if you don't do that, then you're going to end up having to raise your grandkids, or the generations are going to trickle and just snowball down that path of spoiledness. And we see that generation after generation being allowed to carry on and not be checked, if you will. Everybody gets a participation trophy. There's no winners. There's no losers. Everybody's, whatever you want to identify as. I'm still waiting for the one day that, I'm surprised that hasn't happened. If I ever get pulled over for speeding, the officer asks me, how fast were you going? Like, well, sorry, officer, I identify as someone that was going the speed limit. Just because, it's just nonsensical nowadays. And to get back onto things, obviously we already gave it away that we're pre-recording this. So today's the feast, the commemoration of the baptism of our Lord. And it's a beautiful, beautiful feast. It's a beautiful time in the history of the world, in the history of salvation, really, because this is the beginning. Well, not the beginning, but it's the first step where our Lord truly starts showing this public intimacy with us, and that, as we alluded to with Genesis, Adam and Eve, this constant struggle and push against God, if you will, that we have due to pride, ego, the 7 deadly sins, etc. That our Lord shows us just how much he loves us and how much he wants to be with us, and not just with us like side by side, not just with us, as a nice little sentiment, but actually dwelling within us. The Holy Ghost, through baptism, the indelible mark that's placed upon a soul that never leaves. This intimacy with our Lord, the unity that two hearts can have through the Holy Eucharist, through the sacraments of the church. That, I mean, no other religion, no other church ever in the history of the world, in the history of all creation, in the history of the universe has ever had what the Catholic Church has. Because there's no other church that brings you to God except the church that God instituted, that Christ instituted, and that's the Catholic Church. That's why the beauty, the tradition, the sacrament, everything just all boils down to intimacy, to love, to charity. And that's the you know, as I was reflecting today, the baptism of our Lord, sanctifying the waters, sanctifying what John the Baptist is doing, sanctifying the Jordan, sanctifying those around that witnessed that event. I mean, it's amazing. How else can you put it? It's just amazing. It's awesome. And that's what we get. That's what we get to rely back onto. Throughout all the craziness, throughout all the crisis, we have that through our faith that can keep us going and get over these crises. Sorry for that rant.
No, that's right. Yeah, and it's also, you see, but that is also the I think there are too many people who get carried away with the commentary and the commentary on the crises. But at the same time, I think there are those who really don't understand the nature of the crisis. And I think, you know, I was reminded the other day of some words of Archbishop Lefebvre. And, you know, and for the sake of the salvation of souls, he was saying, you know, avoid having anything to do with contemporary Rome. Now, there are those, and I would have been one, who are of an opinion, well, how, you know, we're never going to bring about reconciliation if we don't talk, or if we ignore each other, or whatever. But as we were talking about Catholic Inc. earlier, and we have said it on this program before, you know, one of the few things perhaps that I would agree with Mike Voris and Church Militant about is, you know, to think carefully about where you put your money, because one of the things that's clear is the corruption, the financial corruption within the church is not just about the Vatican Bank, but it's endemic to the whole church everywhere.
Well, look at the reports that have come out with the United States and the Bishops' Council that have misappropriated millions, hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars. You know, they've gone to, you know, Planned Parenthood and all these other liberalist ideas. Yeah. And, you know, it just goes to show there that, you know, as much as we, you know, money is the root of all evil type of saying, your money does speak. And I think where you put your money will speak louder than writing an email or a letter to the chancery. If, you know, all of a sudden many Catholics stop putting money into collection plates, stop putting money into these appeals and fund drives that the bishops have, they will have to say, hold on a second, what's going on? Our funding's dried up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would, you know, and to those who say, oh, well, you know, but what about, you know, the stipends for the priests, and, you know, they're not all bad, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, absolutely, that's true. But then just give directly to them.
Right, give directly to the priest. Give the priest a check.
Forget the diocese. You know? Forget the diocese. Just give your money direct to the priest.
but don't put it in a collection basket at the church, because you don't know where that money is going to be going to.
Yeah.
You give it directly to the priest. Write it, put it in a mailbox at the rectory or the priory, whatever. Or back in the old days, priests and Catholics used to have that breast pocket right there. You give them the envelope and just stay. But
yeah.
I got the sleeve. That's where.
But I think I think for a lot of people, follow the money. I mean, that's why, in fact, that's actually what Robert Kennedy was saying yesterday. Follow the money, but I would say, keep it local, and keep it knowable.
Right.
So if there's a monastery or a convent or an outreach program or a project or whatever that's fundraising locally, give to them, because you can see the results. You know where the money's going. You'll know if a new wing has been built or not. You'll know if the homeless are being fed or not. But stop giving to these amorphous fundraisers and collections where you don't know where that money ultimately is going and how it will be used. And don't forget that scandal just a couple of years ago with Peter's Pence.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Peter's Pence, of all things, where money was being used in outrageous ways that no one, no widow with her poor mite in the back of beyond ever thought conceivable that her money would be used for those purposes for which St. Peter's Pence was being abused. But the point here is that a lot of these guys, they only understand money, and as long as the money's coming in, they think everything is okay. That's the point.
Yeah. And the other thing is, when you give directly to the priest, when you give to these local charities, you're fulfilling the precept of the church. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise, because that's the thing that people will say. Well, you're not fulfilling the precept of the church if you don't put money in a collection basket at the church during the Mass. No, that's wrong. The precept doesn't say anything about specifics. It just says you need to contribute to the church, and you contribute to the charities of the church, to the priest directly himself, locally. And again, it's going back to the abuse of what this hierarchy, what this modern agenda is taking place. They're abusing the precepts, the tenets. They're abusing these things because they know, as a Catholic, as a layperson, you have enough, knowledge of the faith that they can get away with this. And they've been doing a pretty good job of it for the past,
and not forgetting,
70 years.
They won't think twice about selling your parish church.
Oh, look at Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, we've lost 50 churches in the Archdiocese of Chicago. 50. That's a 5 and a 0. 50 churches. These are not the new churches that have been built within the last 30 years. These are the churches, that the immigrants came here to Chicago to build with their blood, sweat, and pennies. They worked toilsomely to build these beautiful houses of God. And these are some of the greatest architectural achievements in Chicago.
Yeah.
That soupage has just closed. One church, the Holy Family Church, the oldest church in Chicago, I believe, survived the Chicago fire, closed. It survived the Chicago fire, can't survive cardinal soupage. Come on. And there's been uproar. No, don't get me wrong. The faithful have been fighting, and there's been attempts. So many, still legal battles and everything going on. It's not going to be demolished, hopefully, but he just closed it without even thinking about it. And it's like, you just, selfishness, really. It's pride. It's selfishness. These are hirelings in shepherd's clothing. We know that they're hirelings. And the sad thing is, going back to what we were talking a little bit earlier, it's like, and people don't know. And even the Catholic commentators, they don't understand. Because if people understood and they knew, our churches would be full. Our missions would be full. I wouldn't have to work a secular job. I could run a church. I could run a mission. Because if people truly knew then the traditional clergy that are out there right now wouldn't have to be struggling the way we're struggling. And I'm not trying to, badmouth or bash or anything or guilt people, but it's just that the light bulb moment. You have to have that light bulb moment, and that light bulb moment needs to be for salvation of my soul, for the salvation of my family's soul, for the salvation and sanctification of the church. If you want traditional clergy, they're out there.
Yeah.
You got to find us, and we got to, and that's why we do these podcasts. That's why we do these shows. That's why we have the websites. That's why we work tirelessly, to make sure that a soul that's in need can have the best chance to be saved. And whatever that means. So these Catholic commentators that are all about schism and all about excommunication and all about valid or invalid or whatever, all those buzzwords, those are the ones, just shut it off at the end of the day. Just you know what? It's not worth your time. It's really not. Don't support them if they're going to be calling schismatic. Don't give money to them. Don't support them on Patreon. Don't, buy their books or go to their gift shops or whatever. Give your money to
it would be very easy for me to churn out day after day, gaslighting headlines and YouTube videos and just slating everybody else. It would be really easy to do that, and probably, would treble, quadruple our viewers and possibly subscriptions. It'd be very easy to do that, but there's no integrity in that. There's no point in doing that. There's no integrity in doing that. And the other thing to watch out with nearly all of the most popular Catholic commentators, the other thing to note is, with one or two exceptions, the vast majority of them, for all, however many books and PhDs they may have, they're not actually in any way authorized or licensed by the church, even by the modernist church.
Oh yeah.
They're not formal catechists. They're not licensed professors teaching in Catholic universities or seminaries. They are just, ordinary Catholics who have made a career out of making YouTube videos and slating everybody else.
And I'll say there is a handful. There's a handful of Catholic commentators out there that I know personally that I actually have relationships with. I can pick up my phone and I can call them up, and I know these people through ministry and through just being out and about and getting a name for ourselves here. We've crossed paths. So I do know there's a handful of them that are genuine, sincere. They're not doing this as careerism. They're not doing this to make up. They have a genuine, sincere love for the church, love for the souls, and they're doing what we're doing here, for salvation. So putting out commentary, putting out input, giving you the best means to make an informed decision based off of what's going on. So, it's important that we realize just because you use the name Catholic, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, doesn't necessarily mean you have the stamp of approval. And what you say is, for lack of a better word, infallible. It's what? It's okay. I've cut a lot of Catholic commentary the past couple of years. I've stopped watching a lot of people or listening to a lot of podcasts or news articles and agencies. I'm not going to lie, and I'm not saying this because I'm biased, but the articles and content that we put out for the Old Roman, that's the best. It's universal. It's truly universal. We're giving you commentary from everywhere. It's not just one aspect of the Catholic world. It's as objective as possible. So if you really want to have information that's objective and the bias scale is not quite as high as others, seriously, and you won't be bored. You won't. There's articles and podcasts. There's so much content on the Old Roman. It saves me. It's a one-stop shop. I can go to that website. I can scroll through. I can get the information I need to do. I don't have to worry about having 100 websites and podcasts on my web browser and click on each tab. I can just go there and scroll through. So there's a plug, a drift or whatever, however you want to do that, but not intentional. But I mean, it's true though. It makes it easy.
Let me just find. Now, I will say that a few people have. There's some problem with the forum at the moment, so that when people have signed up, there's for some reason they get an error message and they can't get into the forum. So it seems to be a complication that's way above my experience or knowledge. So I'm backing and forth with the support crew around that. So we will address that because I'm conscious of the fact that actually more than 1,000, I mean almost 4,500 people have actually registered for the forum on the Old Roman, but there's no conversations going on because there is this problem that once you register and then you can't get on. So I wasn't aware of that. I've been made aware of it, and I'm trying to address that. So as soon as that is able, as soon as we get proper functionality on that, I will make sure everybody knows. But otherwise, yes. I mean, the editorial policy on the Old Roman is, we're looking for facts. We're looking as much as we can for objectivity. We're looking for sanity. And those are the sorts of articles we post. Yes, now and again, there'll be the odd salacious or gaslighting headline, but usually the reporter or the journalist concerned or whatever has, what we would consider to be objectively credible credentials. So, sometimes there's the odd headline that may look a bit salacious, but the content invariably will be balanced and objective. And that's so important in this present climate, and especially with, the way politics is so polarized in the secular sphere, and that of course is happening within the church as well. But nothing is published on the Old Roman that hasn't been read through first or listened to first, and if it's felt to be majoritively objective and sensible and sane, then it gets posted for the benefit of others to read. So do check in oldroman.com, theoldroman.com every day. There are updates. You will notice sometimes there are quieter days than other days. Yesterday was a busy day. There were lots and lots and lots of articles. And today there will be less. But that's simply because of the time. There's a time factor involved in running the website. And, the editors, we're all busy with ministry and with work. So all these things have to be done as and when we can. Like, for example, this pre-recorded edition of Unscripted.
And the other thing is obviously I'm in Chicago. The good archbishop's in Brighton. We're not like in a room next to each other where we can easily just share information with each other. And hey, can you help me out with this? Can you help me? There's time differences. There's the internet and email and ability to transfer files if need be. So we're making do with what we have, and by the grace of God, I think we've made quite a remarkable improvement since we all began doing this a few years ago. And knowing myself and my dad, I know will look down on me right now. I'm not as tech savvy as I ought to be for a gentleman who grew up in Radio Shack. You think I would be one of the IT geeks of the world, but unfortunately not. So I don't know as much as I should, but I'm learning, and we're all learning to master the best we can this technology so we can be there for you guys. So be patient with us. Patience is still a virtue.
Yeah. And and of your charity, I know we've been slating Catholic Inc. and commentators, but none of this comes free. Even to broadcast this and record this, etc., requires subscriptions to platforms and so on and so forth. And we still don't receive enough actually on a monthly basis to cover everything, to cover all the actual costs of producing the Old Roman and Old Roman TV. So please do consider, if you aren't already, becoming a Patreon patron and supporting us. If everybody, this is the thing, if everyone who viewed the content gave just $1 or $2 a time, that would cover everything. That would actually cover everything and some. But the truth is, not everyone who does view does. And that's, not putting anybody down for not doing that.
Right. Yes.
We don't put it all behind a paywall like some others do. But for just a few dollars a month could make all the difference to our budget and save me from the humiliation that sometimes is to beg people to make up the shortfall. So we have some very generous benefactors and patrons for whom we're very grateful, but it's not fair really that a few should pay for the many when all could afford to give more or to give something that would just help us all, and in fact enable us to do more as well.
And even if you can't do Patreon or do anything online, we still have snail mail. You can still mail a check. You can, reach out to us privately. We have accounts set up, where we can make things work. It doesn't necessarily have to go through Patreon. I mean, that's the easiest and most reliable, because then it shows us a regular subscription base. So we can, have a financial plan and set. But if you can make charitable donations any means possible, it will greatly help us, and you will know the money will go to that use. I mean, we keep ledgers, everything. I have ledger books in the sacristy that I keep track of everything. So every penny is accounted for, and exactly. I can say, hey, this donation was given to me by check by so and so, this date, time, put into the account for this use. Everything's accounted for. There's no, shady business going on.
Well, we're speaking of appeals. The Tagapo Chapel appeal in the Philippines is still going. We still need the work has started, so we raised enough to begin the works, but not yet to finish. So please do consider. You can find the details of that at www.celsi.org. I'm going to put both those websites up there under appeals. So do look out for that. Tagapo Chapel appeal. And also, of course, the winter appeal. My annual winter appeal is still going for the homeless. That's to provide toiletries and other things that statutory agencies don't provide. So, statutory agencies might provide shelter, they might provide essential clothing or tents or sleeping bags, whatever, but what they don't supply is toiletries and underwear and socks and that sort of thing, which makes all the difference. To have fresh underwear and socks when you're living on the streets actually makes a huge psychological difference, as well as a cleanliness one as well. So do please visit celsi.org and find the appeals page and contribute there. Otherwise, also acceptable, of course, are general donations for my expenses as well. So, right. And unless there's anything else burning you want to discuss, Brother Tom?
I don't believe so. I think we covered enough for this week. And of course, if anything does happen within the next 24 hours, it's not by ignorance or anything on our part. We were recording this a day before it gets released. So God forbid something happens crazy in the next 24 hours, but if it does, we'll cover it next week.
Yeah.
But I guess
next week's going to be a pre-record as well, by the way, just so you all know. And Bishop Kelly hopes to join us by the end of the month or before the end of the month.
Yes, well. He's been very busy, a lot going on in his ministry, all good stuff, of course. So he gets a break from us here, but he's doing the Lord's work in much more important ways. So pray for him for that, and of course, be assured he's praying for all of us while he's working. So with that, Your Grace, pray a blessing, please.
Sure. Dominus vobiscum,
Et cum spiritu tuo,
sit nomen Domini benedictum,
ex hoc nunc in usque in saeculorum.
Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini,
qui fecit caelum et terra.
Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos et mane et semper. Amen. Well, bless you all. Thanks again for watching, and please do stay faithful, do support us, and be assured we pray for all of you and for your intentions and for our salvation, all of us, together all the time. So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.